When you're talking about China in the 21st century, it's very important to understand that you're not talking about a failed democracy. You're not talking about a corrupt democracy. Communist China is a country that does not claim to be a democracy at all. And you're now going to hear this from the government's own perspective.
Every 5 years, the Chinese Communist Party holds a party congress when it clicks the refresh button on itself. They elect a new generation of senior leaders called the Politburo Standing Committee. The last time this happened was in 2012. Let's face it, you hear complaints that the selection process was too secretive and involves favoritism, but what people rarely mention is that more than many other political systems, advancement in the Chinese Communist Party is largely based on merit. To enter the party and state official system, you must pass China's civil service exam. This levels the playing field. Social rank does not affect test scores. For more than 1,000 years, to serve in the Chinese government, high and low-born alike had to pass exams.
So you notice what they've done here. Obviously, this is very carefully crafted, intentional propaganda coming from the Communist government of China. They first tell you that this is concerning the election of people to the Politburo Standing Committee. Where does the word Politburo come from? Where does that structure and tradition of government come from? Not ancient China, not from 1,000 years ago, not from 5,000 years ago in China. It comes from Russia. It comes from Soviet communism. Even the concept and organization of the Politburo. But that's not what they're talking about here. They don't get into the question of who votes, who elects, who selects. No. You're first told that people are appointed to the Politburo on the basis of merit, and you're then told that this merit is established through exams, and the exams have no favoritism whatsoever. They don't reflect your class status or any kind of corruption within the system, and that this tradition of exams goes back more than 1,000 years to some kind of ancient, pre-communist Chinese tradition. So think about the basis for legitimacy in the Chinese political system that this video is presenting you with.
The modern exam lasts 5 hours. It includes advanced mathematics, logic, verbal skill, and world knowledge.
So politicians in China have to write an exam that lasts for 5 hours. There is no claim whatsoever that their legitimacy rests on competitive elections, that it rests on debate, cross-examination by the public, interviews in the press, election promises. There is absolutely no sense in which they're even pretending that this is a democratic process in our sense of the word democracy. This is very important. If you're talking about almost any other rival to American power in the world right now, for example, Russia does claim to be a legitimate democracy. And they may be a corrupt democracy or a bad democracy. It may be inadequate in various ways. But nevertheless, Russia has elections and has very similar claims to legitimacy as the United States of America. Cambodia claims to be a democracy. They have elections. They're incredibly corrupt, imperfect elections, but nevertheless, they'll claim that they have elections and a parliament and so on and so forth. China is not playing that game. China is not presenting itself in theory or in practice as a flawed or corrupt democracy. They're telling you very clearly their concept of legitimacy in government is not based on elections at all. It is not based on voting at all. It is not based on public choice or politicians' promises or the free play of ideas, mutual cross-examination, criticism, debate, discussion, at all.
If you pass, promotion then is based on a 10-tier ranking system. On average, it takes 20 to 30 years for an entry-level Ke or Fu Ke civil servant to become a Guo or Fu Guo party or state leader. Very few get near the top. Term limits also keep new ideas flowing. The party's top job is General Secretary. For the US Congress, the turnover rate in any given election is around 10% or less. One congressman, Representative John Dingell of Michigan, got re-elected 30 times and spent 60 years in the House. What about the Communist Party of China?
The turnover rate of the Central Committee maintained roughly about 62% on average every 5 years. So this actually turnover rate is much faster than some of the democracies around the world.
So this is quite a surreal comparison, right? The turnover rate in the United States, if someone is not elected again to Congress, it's either because they failed in the elections, the public chose someone else instead of them, or it's because they retired, or they decided to quit politics and get a different job. In the Chinese system, how can you make this comparison where nobody is engaged in competitive elections, nobody is being voted in or being voted out? What does it mean to say that the turnover rate is different? Now, it's also really worthwhile to note, for better or for worse, in terms of the real academic study of Chinese politics, how it goes on in universities and in erudite books by specialists and for specialists. This system of examinations and the various ranks of civil servants that have just been mentioned, the formal on-paper criteria for how people are advanced in the Chinese system and how sometimes they're eliminated, it is never even discussed because the whole system is pervasively corrupt. I mean, when you talk about civil servants in China rising to the top, the reasons given in like hardcore political science analysis of how the system works, it's entirely about favoritism. And that favoritism isn't always on the basis of financial corruption or economic corruption. It's sometimes like, well, this politician was trying to accomplish this sort of thing, and he knew that this guy would have the skills to achieve that goal. You know, the favoritism is sometimes, it's transactional, but not always necessarily having to do with the paying of bribes. And when people, when people dramatically fall from power, when their careers suddenly end, that's what this book is all about, well, yeah, they may have bought their way into office. There's a chapter of this book that's called Buying Public Office. But very often, of course, they're kicked out precisely because there is a corruption scandal. Their corruption is exposed, their bribe-taking is exposed, and so on and so forth. So, yes, especially under the Xi Jinping government. When Xi Jinping first came into power, the number of highly ranked political cadres, important, powerful political people, who were eliminated, kicked out of their positions of power, and in some cases sent to prison, and in some cases executed, was tremendous. There was an enormous number of people who fell from power. But that's not because they lost elections. That's not because they sat in front of a camera like this and had a debate with a journalist or with another politician and people thought, I don't like this guy's ideas. I think this other person has better ideas. No, it's the brutal world of favoritism, favors given and favors taken within the Chinese Communist Party. It is a corrupt and corrupting world where people generally rise to power because of corruption and they also fall from power because of corruption.
As data show, party elections can have this effect. Along with term limits, elections help promote reform and help ensure new Chinese leaders rise based more on performance than on privilege.
China's rise has attracted global attention, and many have focused on China's economic model behind its rise, which is of course important. But China's evolving political change has been somehow ignored by many. In fact, without much fanfare, China has established a system of meritocracy, or what can be described as selection plus election. Competent leaders are selected on the basis of performance and broad support through a vigorous process of screening, opinion surveys, internal evaluations, and various types of elections.
What a careful choice of phrase that is. In the first place, there's a lot of use of passive voice here. Leaders are selected. Selected by whom? Well, they're not selected from the bottom up, as in a democracy. They're not selected by the people. They don't work for the people, right? Leaders are selected from above. Leaders are selected by other leaders, which makes it fundamentally like an aristocracy. I mean, I hate to tell you, but most of the claims made to meritocracy here could have been made by kings in medieval times, both in Europe and in China. And indeed, the system of writing examinations as has been mentioned, going back more than 1,000 years. This goes back to the Empress Wu Zetian in China. So these are feudal methods of power sharing and of unequally structured authority. So leaders are selected. And then here we have this great phrase on screen. And various types of elections. Various types. I'm a specialist in political science. And to some extent, I'm a specialist in China now. China's in my top 5 area of expertise, I guess. I'm not narrowly or exclusively an expert on China. There's a certain kind of bias that creeps into my own life simply by virtue of being a specialist. And I had a fan of the channel, a supporter, wrote into me saying that in my videos talking about Chinese politics, I was ignoring the significance of elections within China. And we both had links. I mean, he sent me some links and I sent him some links. Some were to newspaper articles, Wikipedia, what have you, reporting on elections in some sense. As this says here, various types of elections. And of course, I have this kind of insider's bias. I have this political science specialist bias, where what I was trying to say to the guys, look, you have to understand, nobody in the field takes this seriously. These elections, it's almost like a translation error. There are elections in China, but they are not elections in our sense of the word at all. And the Chinese government doesn't even pretend that they are. And indeed, in this book is entirely about corruption in China and Chinese politics. In the index to this book, there is no entry for the word elections. There's nothing about elections. There's nothing about voting. For any other country, if this were a book on political corruption in Russia, the main topic of conversation might be corruption of elections, right? And so on for many countries around the world that struggle with having a corrupt democracy. China, it's not a corrupt democracy. It has no pretense to being a democracy at all. So this book is talking about corruption, but this is talking about corruption of appointed positions in government, people buying positions in government. But they're not buying elections. They're buying what would be, hypothetically, meritocratic appointed positions in a government that both in theory and in practice is in absolutely no way democratic. But keep in mind here, pay attention to the propaganda. The structure of government in China is never once described here in this propaganda message. It is never once described as being Russian in origin. It's never once described as being German in origin. Okay? Karl Marx was German. Lenin was Russian. Everything about the Chinese system of government is derivative of European traditions, specifically communist, Marxist-Leninist traditions. But that's entirely buried here, and we're instead presented with the fiction that somehow the Communist Party of China is carrying on the ancient pre-modern tradition of Confucius, of feudal, medieval, aristocratic China. And you know what the irony is? Maybe it's true. Maybe they are. Maybe in their rejection of democracy, they really are carrying on this more feudal and aristocratic tradition.
This is much in line with the Confucian tradition of meritocracy. After all, China is the first country that invented the civil service examination system, or the Keju system.